Hi, my name is Jen Scheuer. I teach at Purdue University and I live in Lafayette, Indiana. Primarily, I'm a printmaker, but I also work with artist books, ink wash, and drawing as well. I'm especially interested in printmaking because I found that the mark making really appeals to me, the act of making multiples. There's a meditative quality to printmaking. I found a lot that when I made an image, and it's sold or was given away, that there was an experience of loss in myself. And so having multiples as well as this act of making a matrix and then using it, destroying it, there's something interesting in that, like psychologically a little bit to me as well. In regards to where my work comes from or how it's evolved, I'm really interested in reading books and talking with historians. I visit a lot of museums. I'm interested in the history of printmaking. And so all of that is appealing to me in the imagery that I'm creating, the ideas that I'm developing as well. Much of the work I make is based on a historical idea called the Doctrine of Signatures, which is from the 16th century. The idea was developed by Paracelsus, and it was an idea related to organization of the world, but specifically what I've been looking at is plants related to the Doctrine of Signatures. So the Doctrine of Signatures is an idea that plants can inform us how to use them because they look like our bodies. So there's healing attributes that are visible, or through the areas that they grow, or through their taste, that sort of thing. What's interesting about this idea is that it's an idea that exists in different time periods and different cultures, and so there's some aspect of this being able to see and be informed by food and herbs and medicine and healing the body. And so that's what's interesting to me is, these different elements, that it's related to spirituality, it's related to thinking and organization, it's related to the history of science. And although it's not an idea that's currently practiced in medicine, I think that there's a lot of values behind the idea. Yeah, I've been interested in the history of women's health in medicine, and I had been interested in the history of birth control. So I was doing a lot of research into the history of birth control and reading books. And, a lot of them talked about like the hormones that are in different plants and that sort of thing. And I had made the piece that's on the main page on my website was a fictional plant that was based on a birth control plant called silphium, which was hunted to extinction by the ancient Greeks. And after I had made that piece, then I had been talking with some of my peers and friends and visiting colleagues, and a couple of them had mentioned this idea of the relationships between plants and healing, and that monks had used plants for healing. And so it was kind of this journey after that. And then like once I had, learned about the idea, it really appealed to me for just the different perspectives that, it could be related to spirituality, it could be related, to different forms of structure, it could be just a mnemonic device. Like all of those ideas that were surrounding it were really interesting to me and has been part of the focus. So my early work, a lot of it was, very quick associations, representations of the plant and the organ. But more recently, what I've been exploring with the work is I'm looking at ideas that maybe don't have as fast of a representation. So thinking about, for instance, I made a piece about childbirth and a piece about cancer, that sort of thing. And how do you visualize that? So abstracting it a little further and making these associations. And I think that's probably where the work's heading. Also made work using photography as well as artist books and using different visual language to talk about this similar idea as well. I have a lot of thumbnail images in my sketchbooks, and I go back and revisit these thumbnails over and over again. And so a lot of the works evolve over time, that maybe there's an original sketch I made a few years ago, and I go back and revisit it, and I'm re-editing that composition several times before I make a piece. And oftentimes I also revisit images and ideas, so there's some cyclical element in my work of revisiting, it might be an element of one piece that ends up in another piece, or it may be that, for instance, I made an artist book where there were different pages that talked about different ideas of the Doctrine of Signatures, and so different elements of my other works ended up in that piece. So I tend to work quite cyclical. This summer I'm working on images for a prayer flag project, so I was invited for it was a project with the Southern Graphics Conference that was canceled this year, but it had intended originally to be prayer flags for Puerto Rico, and my students also helped to work on this project. It was organized by Beauvais Lions at the University of Tennessee, and people from around the world were making prayer flags. And so the timeline got extended a little bit, and I really focused with the classroom of messages of peace and hope and justice. And so that's now what I'm working on as well, and creating images for that project. So for instance, the scale image that I just completed, that image has reappeared several times. It's reappeared in an artist book. The first version of it was an image that I had included a Khalil Gibran excerpt from the Prophet over about joys and sorrows. So there's a lot of that repetition of elements that show up again in my work. I started the prayer flag project. I had, created my first image, or a portion of my first image, back in January or February, and then I was teaching during that time. So as the COVID, changed the teaching in the classroom, I set aside the project, and now I'm just revisiting it in the past month. And so what I had started was, it was a self-portrait from when I was 18, and I was in the program called the AmeriCorps, which is a social service program. And I was interested in these making images about myself during that time with community service and ways that I served in the community. And so that had been my original idea with the prayer flag project, and what I was going to create, and just these messages of service and rebuilding. And so some of the images that I have, I finished an image where I was chainsawing trees for a nature preservation habitat, and then I have images where I've collected seed and grass for preservation of plants. And other projects that we worked on were building trails and working with schools, that sort of thing. So I have this series of images that I'm going back and revisiting, and that has been inspiring for me. I was invited to the North Louisiana Virtual Residency through a connection with Raluca Yanku, and I was excited for a residency that would help me to be engaged and to check in with others. And Raluca and I have collaborated in different ways in the past, and we've always talked about collaborating on a book project together. And so this summer, even though we're at a distance, we're collaborating together on a book project. So we have a couple different projects in mind, but the first project we're working with is based on the refrigerator and how our experiences have changed with our homes and with our refrigerators and the act of eating, and how that's changed over time. So my personal experience, beginning in March, I hadn't gone to a grocery store in a couple months. And so, a lot of this was ordering food and picking it up at the grocery store, or just changing my food habits as well. And so it was a conversation we were often having with family members, that sort of thing, about food and experience and making do. And then also thinking about how the grocery store was changing, and access to materials at the grocery store were changing, and how all of the people around us, like how their habits were changing, or as well as access, and who had access or who doesn't have access. There were a lot of conversations in that regard that we were exploring. There's something, I think, visually interesting and a little humorous in regards to a refrigerator and a project around a refrigerator as well. And we're both working with relief printmaking, with carving, and so it has kind of a specific style as well. So, we're still in the process of developing the project. We were thinking about, the hinges, about the multiple image of a refrigerator that, you can see through the pages, that, some images have less, some images have more. We've collected images from our community and our friends through social media and through some of the residents. And so, we're kind of developing the project as it goes as well. My studio practice this summer is different than what my normal studio practice would be in regards to resources and access as well. So I have a printing press that I bought last year with the thought of traveling with it, and so this is my first instance of traveling with it. This summer I'm working a lot with relief printmaking, which is something that I can do with just a table and carving, and I have a small press that I can print on as well. So my basement has become my printing studio. I mean, the residency's been really helpful just to hear about what people are making, as well as checking in and this time to be accountable. For me, it's allowed me to, create an artificial deadline during the summer of how much am I going to achieve every week by this point. That this has really been fulfilling in that way, to connect and, to see what people are making, and, to have those dialogues and hear about, others' ideas of how things are changing as well.